All right, welcome everybody back to our gardening workshop with Vanessa of Garden Farms. She will be teaching us a little bit more about gardening indoors with some planters or on your patio, whichever. And then we have a special time for some Q&A, so please feel free to use our chat box here and drop any questions you have. Vanessa's going to be answering them as she goes along and at the end for you. Go ahead, Vanessa, all yours.
All right. Hi, everybody. Vanessa here from Garden Farms, and today I had a request to talk more about container gardening. So this is, a great topic to learn about if you don't have a space for a garden or if you're even growing indoors. Basically the thing that you always want to keep in mind, especially if you're growing indoors, is that you want to find a place located in a sunny window. Plants need sun, so what tends to happen if we're growing, and I mean, I'm focusing on edibles like herbs. Herbs are great to grow indoors. I'm not talking about houseplants right now, just to be clear. And so crops, whether it's herbs or actually herbs is going to be your best bet. Or if you're trying to grow tomatoes or something like that, and you have a light that you can put over like a plant light, your plants, then you can grow anything indoors. But we're going to talk more about focusing on considering that you don't have that extra stuff, that you don't have like a indoor hydroponic system, or even the lights. Although they are fairly cheap, you can find them at the hardware store. But we're going to talk about sunny windows and what you can grow inside and just growing outside. So during our last episode, we talked a lot about kind of building up your soil for your containers. So the difference between your containers and your garden boxes is the amount of oxygen that your plants are getting. So when you are creating your potting mix, if you're creating your own, or you're just buying it from the store, you want to make sure that you're buying potting mix as opposed to garden soil. You want potting soil because that is going to have more fluff in it. It's going to have, either perlite, or it's going to have some cocoa coir. It's going to have whatever, just things that you need to, things that the soil needs to kind of fluff itself up and have a little bit more oxygen flow. And so, what we did last week when we built our own soil for the containers, we did about 2 parts garden soil to 1 part perlite and 1 part cocoa coir. And so that's basically if you are kind of building your own, it's going to be cheaper that way. It'll go a lot further if you just buy those ingredients separately, or again, you can just buy your potting soil. So big questions to have from the start. What kind of containers can you use? I described this last week, where you can get these containers if you go to the local Smith's or Albertsons or just your local grocery store that has a bakery department. These are frosting buckets that they use, and they throw these away every single day. And so if you go and you say, hey, do you have any frosting buckets to donate? They'll just happily give you a stack of these. They're food grade. They're perfect for gardening. This size is perfect. And so you can just, drill some holes in the bottom if you're going to have this outside, and use your potting mix, fill this up. If you want to paint it and make it look nicer, you can. I love these. So the question of, okay, well, do I need holes in the bottom? If not, putting rocks. Say you have a really nice planter like this, for example. This is a ceramic, so it doesn't have any holes on the bottom. So, one thing I could do is I could have a pot that already has like a plastic pot with holes in the bottom, just put it inside here. But if I wanted to fill this up and use the maximum amount of space, and I'm just going to keep this inside, I would just fill it up with my mix, probably go a little bit lighter on the garden soil, because it's going to be indoors, and it's not gonna, it's gonna be a little bit more stale, if that makes sense. So I would probably do equal parts of soil, you know, perlite if that's what you're using, and coco if I was gonna have my plants indoors. And so, the next thought is, okay, well then if I don't have holes on the bottom, right, should I put a layer of rocks to kind of create some space between the bottom of the soil and the bottom of the pot so excess water can come through or the oxygen can flow up? There's no need to do that because all you're doing is just creating a space for stagnant water to sit. Um, like I talked about last week, is if you have container gardens, you want to figure out how much water your plant needs. The goal is to not have any excess water at all. So I'm gonna try watering a little less than I need initially, and then adding more as I need to. Eventually, I want to have a special cup that's for this pot, and I know that I'm gonna water it just like a dog. I'm gonna feed it the same day. I'm sorry, the same amount and at the same time every day. Just like a pet, you don't want to feed it a ton of food and then feed it a little bit and just kind of, you want to have it on a consistent schedule. So plants love that. They're on a cycle, just like every other living thing. And so just to have that feeding time stay regular is really important. And so what happens is if you are creating this space full of rocks, you're basically shortening the amount of space that your roots can have to grow. You're shortening your available growing space. So I say just forget the rocks, and what you can do is just fill it up, and then just let it dry out a little bit. Plants don't need to just be moist all the time. That's a really kind of that's a thought that a lot of people have, and it can hurt your plants actually. What happens if your plants are always sitting in water? That basically all those air pockets in your soil stay filled with water, and that creates that whole lack of oxygen. And so it's good to actually let your plants dry out in between waterings. Now, you don't want it to be bone dry, but if you let that soil dry out just a little bit and then feed it again, all of those little air pockets are filling with oxygen and your roots get a chance to breathe. Now, also that said is that plants sleep just like us. So, and when plants are sleeping, they're not eating, right? They're not taking up that extra water. So you don't want to water your plants at night. And that goes for indoor or outdoor plants. And especially for containers, because then what's happening is if they're not drinking that water, there's nowhere else for that water to go. Whereas, in a garden space, that water can access through the bottom, and, it's not that big of a deal. But in a container where there's not much places for it to go, it can create root rot. So your plants are sleeping with wet feet is what we call it. And they're just sitting in that water and they're gonna drown and your plants are gonna die. And so there is you can water your plants too much. And that happens a lot with indoor plants. People are like, oh, I water all the time, Let it dry out a little bit, get that oxygen, and especially for containers without holes. It's vital that you actually do that. That's the trick. If you want to grow in a container without holes on the bottom, you must do that. If you have the holes and you have a little tray at the bottom, this is something that I talked about last week, where you have that tray of water. If it's sitting with water inside of that little drip tray, empty it out. That means it was too much water. That means you can cut down on how much you're feeding that plant. Another trick you can do is if the plant is dry and you need to water it, water from the bottom. Put water in the tray so it takes up from the bottom. And the top of the soil itself doesn't need to be wet because the roots are down below. So if you have your soil levels up here, you know, the roots are down here. This is where they need to take up that water. So if you feed from the bottom and it takes up just as much as it needs, the water's going straight to the roots, right where it needs it, and that everything above that is all excess. And that can lead to soil mats, which I talked about last time as well. If you're growing indoors and you keep the tops of your plants wet all the time, that's where those little tiny soil mats will go and lay their eggs and reproduce. Everything happens within that magical top inch of your soil. You can dry that out, you will eliminate your problem. And the way that you can do that is with your bottom feeding. Another tip to water your plants is using a bottle with a long neck. And so what I like to do, this is a great tip too if you're kind of like going out for a couple days and you'll be there watering plants, or you just want to water your plants every day like this. It's fine. So I like to grab a bottle with a long neck, fill it up, and then what you could do, as you can, I don't know if you could see that, but I have a bottle in this point here. What you do, you fill it up with water and you just put it right into the pot like that. What happens is with that long neck, the water is going to be right at that soil level again. You're eliminating those first couple inches of that soil, and the gravity is going to do its part. So it's not going to it's not going to drown in there. It's going to just gravity's going to take it as it needs. And then when there's no more place for that water to go, once it's all filled up with water there, it's going to stay in the bottle. And so you can actually see the water level lower as the day goes on, or as the couple days go by, depending on the conditions of whether it's inside or outside, cold or hot. And then once it's empty, you just take it out, refill it. I like to kind of fill in the little hole, and then I like to put in a different spot every time. Because what's going to happen is when you take out your bottle, there's going to be a little hole of where that was, and it's going to be moist there. So the hole that was created is going to stay. So I like to kind of fill that hole in and kind of like loosen it up a bit. And then I'll put it in a different spot. This is a great way to also feed your plants. Last time we talked about using coffee grounds as nitrogen. So if you wanted to mix a little bit of coffee grounds and water into this and feed your plants that way too. This is a great method to use with your indoor plants as well, again, to prevent that, topsoil always staying moist and, potentially bringing in those soil mats. So those are a couple ways to kind of get past that. So, all right, so now when it comes to growing your plants in your containers, so herbs, like I said, that's a great crop to grow inside. Some herbs get really huge and are not really ideal for indoors, but the size of your container is going to determine how big the plant gets. So if you're growing indoors in a tiny little container, your plant is not going to get huge, right? There's no way that this is dill right here, that this would get this big in a tiny little container. But another thought is that there are some plants that really like a lot of sunlight, and sometimes that's just not possible in a sunny window. So one thing to consider is, look up your crops, look at how much sunlight they need. If they can take part shade, then that's a great one to grow inside. You want to keep it in your sunniest window for that light, but also for warmth. The plants need that warmth to be able to germinate, for example, for one, and then but also to grow. They like that warmth, especially if it's like a spring or summer herb. Basil, for example, a very popular herb, loves the heat. Cilantro, on the other hand, likes cool weather. So although it would need that sunlight. It doesn't need as much warmth as the basil. So thinking about that, thinking about your container size, what you can grow, think of your location. And then also herbs are really nice because you can kind of pack them in together. If you have a little window box, okay, here's a little tiny one. I have a long one too, but for example for this, if you wanted to grow, all one type, if you wanted to grow chives, you can grow a lot of chives in here. Chives don't really compete for space, so you can just sprinkle all your seeds and it just grows like grass. Now, if you're gonna grow, I want to do like maybe cilantro and parsley, say, in here. I would probably do maybe just two. You want to think about, your plant size. Again, this is a container that would reflect how big that canopy got, right? So if I was going to just grow if I was going to grow multiple plants in here, the amount of space that their roots have to spread is how big they're going to be able to get. If you start stuffing in tons of plants, the roots are going to compete for space and your plants are not going to grow. And so, like I said, in a container this size, I would probably just do maybe two plants, or you could do garlic. Garlic is a great little herb to grow in a container and just like a green onion. If you take a little garlic clove and the rough part, there's the rough part, and then there's the pointy part of the garlic clove. The rough part is where its roots come out, and the pointy part is where its leaf comes out. And so you can, as that leaf comes out, it's going to look like a blade of grass. You can cut that down and use it like a chive. You can cut it up and it tastes like garlic. It's really, really good. You always want to make sure that you're leaving at least 1 to 2 inches of green because that's how it eats. Without the green, it's going to die. So in this case, each garlic clove is going to produce a stalk. So in here, I would maybe put like about four garlic cloves in here. And so that's another one that, it's a little smaller if you wanted to do maybe a cilantro and a parsley and then like a garlic clove in the center or something. It's fun to play around with your containers because, you can use the space. You can kind of fill up the space how you want, but it's also, it's fun to play with what you have there because you can do a lot of different things. For example, here I have lemongrass. This dill was a volunteer. I don't even know how it ended up in there, but now I have a couple of calendula flowers that are coming up in the bottom here. It's mostly kind of volunteer stuff, but it's all kind of on the side, taking its own space, but really just using all that space for the best. So, okay, so now when it comes to seeds and growing, seeds are very expensive. So what I like to do when I plant in containers, unless I'm doing, like I said, the chives or I'm sprinkling the seeds, if I was going to do, one plant, I'm not going to waste a bunch of seeds to grow that one plant. And so this is where egg cartons are really nice. I love to just reuse stuff, multi-purpose things. Makes me feel better about the waste that we create in general. Egg cartons are a really great seed starter because you can just fill them up with soil. I like to just use little Tupperware containers. This one's perfect because it fits 2 egg cartons, and then I can put the lid on, until the seeds germinate and create like a little mini greenhouse in here. But egg cartons are nice because once the plants start growing and the roots start growing, they'll start growing through the containers. It's like, they sell the fancy ones, the little pots that, biodegrade, you can put them in your soil. That's exactly what these are. So I just love using egg cartons for this purpose. And so once you get your plants, and then this is also a good way to see how your germination rate is. And so if you're like, oh, I found a really old packet of seeds, it says plant in 2014, are they even good? In that case, I would do maybe 1 to 2 seeds per little cell in here, and then see, wow, out of the, 24 seeds I planted, I got about 16, so that's pretty good. Or you could do 1 in each cell, it's up to you. But the point is that once they are a couple inches tall, then you could just take that cell, just kind of rip it apart and plop it right into your soil. And that way the roots don't get disturbed in the transplant. So I really love that. Another, method, if you can just reuse, like I reuse little styrofoam cups that I get. Like I just love to reuse anything. You can use anything as a container, right? You poke a little hole in the bottom and you got yourself a container. So I really love to save my seeds that way. I like to just plant a couple of seeds, whatever grows, then I can move that into my containers, and I know that I'm not just going to have like a ton of extra waste. Another thought for starting your plants is propagation. So propagation is basically taking a cutting of one plant and rooting it. So what you can do, so anytime that you're going to try to propagate something, and it's so fun to play with, if it doesn't work, whatever. But if it does, it's total bonus. So for example, you always want to take a cutting of a plant that is not in flower. So when a plant is in flower, it's putting its energy into that flowering process, and the energy is not in its roots at that time. But when a plant is not in flower yet, that's the best time to take a cutting. So you could try this with lavender, with rosemary, with any plant. Just play with it. And so what you can do is, so I like to use containers that don't have holes when I'm propagating, because this is the time that you do want that soil to stay moist all the time. So what I do is I take, for example, this old coffee cup. I got up my cutting here, and you wanna look at nodes. So sometimes, so basically, when you take a cutting of a plant, I'm gonna show this first. So the place where these little stems are coming off of the main branch, these are growing nodes. That's where the energy, the growing energy is focused on. And so what I like to do is when I take a cutting, I pinch off the bottom, say maybe a couple inches of leaves, or the bottom 2 to 3 sets of leaves. Okay, because that basically exposes open those nodes. And then you want to make sure that, so basically when you're cutting those little stems off, you're creating like an open wound, right? So what you can do is let that sit outside just untouched for a few hours, and then put it into your soil. So it has time to kind of scar over a little bit. It's not a wet open wound that's prone to infection. You can also take a rooting hormone. So, and actually aloe vera makes a great rooting hormone. So if you have aloe vera growing at your house, you can cut the tip, and basically what you can do is make like a little sleeve. So you can cut the tip off, and then cut that tip off again, so you have like a little pocket where you can, or a little envelope where you can slip that sleeve or slip the stem right through that aloe vera, like a collar. And then you can put that into your soil. Or you could just take the stem that you cut and dip it into the aloe vera. So you can, if you want to scrape it out with a spoon, or just leave it right there in the leaf, and just kind of dip it in there and make sure that that open wound where you made that cut, it gets that aloe vera on there. And then you can put it into a really soft soil. So I use coco coir for my propagation. So now we basically want to create a little greenhouse for this. So once you put it into your soil, you want to get a plastic bag and then cover the top of it. And this is going to create like a little mini greenhouse for your plant. and give it about 2 weeks. You want to make sure that the soil is moist, so you can check on it, every, I don't know, like every 4 days or so. And then after about 2 weeks, give the stem a gentle tug. If it comes out easily, it hasn't rooted. But if it kind of has a little bit of resistance, you know that the roots are actually starting to come out. And then once you have a strong root system in there, you can plant it into another container in your garden. One thought about starting seeds, I like to start my seeds in the spring outdoors. These are all outside all the time. And so because they're already acclimatized to the weather, and that way when I go to transplant them into my pots, they're ready to go. Now, a lot of people start their seeds indoors, which is totally fine. You actually don't need any sunlight to start your seeds. Your seeds can be started in a dark closet. It's only when they break through the soil, that's when they need the light. So, the issue with starting your seeds indoors is you want to make sure to harden them off. So if they've been their whole life, they've been living in a climate controlled, house, and then all of a sudden you're going to take that seedling and put it outside in the pot, and it's exposed to the elements. The temperature is way different. It gets cold and then it gets hot. So you want to harden it off. So that means that once it's a couple inches tall, once it's ready to transplant, you take it outside for maybe 2 hours. Put it outside for 2 hours, then bring it back inside. The next day, put it outside for about 4 hours. Bring it back inside. The next day, put it outside for 6 to 7 hours. So you want to take about 5 to 7 days to harden off your plant, so that by the end of that week, then you can leave it outside the whole time. And so that's really important for your plants to start with seeds. But let's see. Yeah, as far as the hole situation, drilling the holes, I would say that unless you are keeping your plants indoors and really going to be on, making sure that it's drying out and just monitoring how much water you're feeding it. It's fine, like I said. I have most of my indoor plants actually are in containers that don't have any holes at the bottom. And it also kind of gives me a little bit of leeway of like, oh crap, I forgot to feed my plants. It's not as important because again, letting them dry out is healthy for them. That said, if you are keeping your container outside, you definitely want to put holes in the bottom, because if I have this full of soil and a plant and it's raining, this thing is going to flood, and that stagnant water, it's just going to be sitting in a pool of water, and it's 100% you're going to kill your plant. It has to have a way to escape if it's outside. Not only root rot, but you can have other fungal infections you can get from that stagnant air. Just a general lack of airflow can bring on a lot of diseases for your plants. In your sunny window, if you want to have multiple plants or get, something like this, like a little garden box where you can have your plants, be sure again to separate them, just to make sure that the roots are not going to be in a place where they're fighting for space. One of them is going to win, and one of them is going to die, basically. I really like to, if I'm going to be growing plants, some herbs inside, I like to just have them all have their separate container, and then that way I don't have to worry about it. And then, just kind of keep an eye on if I need to get a bigger pot for them to grow. It's easy enough to just pull that plant out, repot it, and you don't have to worry about messing up the roots with the other and whatnot. So, Yeah, I think that's about everything. I'm gonna open my chat box up in case anyone has any questions. I'm just gonna check in here and just leave this next few minutes for questions. So let me just check in here. All right. Well, I will give you about a minute or so to send your questions if you have any. Additionally, if you have a question that you want me to expand on, you can send us an email at info@gardenfarms.net. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, and we're actually creating our YouTube channel. So it's a Garden Farms Foundation YouTube channel. So I'm going to be putting weekly videos of how-tos and just giving you little tips and showing you how to, do little garden tasks focusing on specific crops or specific subjects. It won't be just so like across the board, kind of like what today was, but okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, Vanessa, thank you so much again for doing this with us weekly. We really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys are also getting out there and not getting out there, but staying in and maybe trying some of the things that she suggested. I know I myself am not very good at gardening. It's not my strongest skill set, but I really want to. Like, I have that desire. So why not try it, right? Now is definitely the time to make that happen. Okay, well, thank you again. And if you guys do have any additional questions, just let us know. You can always comment in the chat box on YouTube or also on Facebook, and we can get those to her. So, okay, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.